Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Jessic. I'm the Sexual Assault Response Team and Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Program Manager. So as Alyssa said, thanks for joining us today for this presentation. Leah, do you want to introduce yourself briefly as well?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I am the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Victim Advocate. I'm also the Underserved Populations Policy Advocate here at MCASA. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and dive into our training today on the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Victim Notification Protocol for the state of Maryland. So just before I dive into it, I want to be clear that the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative is a national project, and I'll go into that a little bit here at the beginning of the presentation. But this protocol is specific to the state of Maryland. So it does not necessarily apply to any other state or city that is using or has SAKI funding. So I'm going to try and keep an eye on the chat today. Please feel free to drop in any comments or thoughts. And we'll have a couple of polls as well. So just to be clear, this project was supported by a Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant that is provided by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, but nothing in this presentation necessarily represents the view of the BJA itself. So before we dive into kind of the victim notification protocol and how we engage survivors through the SAKI project, I want to go over what SAKI is and what SAKI funding can support. So SAKI, or the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, is really a national effort to address the growing number of unsubmitted and untested sexual assault evidence kits or rape kits in the country. This started the real push to address this backlog began years ago, really through, I think, Mariska Hargitay and her Joyful Heart Foundation and the documentary I Am Evidence that really highlighted the backlog in Detroit. And since then, there has been a lot of efforts to eliminate the backlog in the country and prevent a future backlog from occurring. So the funding under SAKI can support an inventory of untested kit backlog, and it can also support investigations and prosecutions for these older cases with an untested kit, and then victim services and engagement as well. So that's kind of the notification component that we're talking about today. There's a lot that SAKI has expanded to address. So some additional issues that SAKI will help fund is storage for sexual assault evidence kits, the collection of lawfully owed DNA. So that's like an individual that is convicted of a violent crime and part of their sentence is to have their DNA entered into the CODIS database. It's unfortunate, but it's been discovered that a lot of that DNA has never been collected. So SAKI can also support the collection of that DNA from individuals that were supposed to have it submitted, and things like that. SAKI has also expanded beyond just sexual assault, but also addressing unsolved homicides, especially unsolved homicides in conjunction with a sexual assault or a rape. So what did Maryland decide to do with this funding when we first got the money? So in 2017, the Maryland General Assembly established a sexual assault evidence kit policy and funding committee that was their goal was to address sexual assault response in the state of Maryland and develop best practices and recommendations. As part of the committee's work, they applied for the SAKI project, and then the first step was to conduct an inventory of all the untested kits in the state of Maryland. So I want to be very clear when I say untested kits, because it can get a little confusing, but under the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, there are two types of a backlog. There are untested kits and there is an unsubmitted kit. So an untested kit is a kit that has been submitted to the crime lab for testing by law enforcement, but the crime lab is just unable to get to that because they are overwhelmed, they are understaffed, they don't have enough equipment, they have constant other DNA requests and evidence requests coming into the lab, and they're just unable to get to that kit. That is an untested backlog. An unsubmitted backlog is a backlog where law enforcement never submitted the kit for testing for whatever reason that may be. So there's a variety of reasons they may have, but they just never submitted it to be analyzed by a crime lab for DNA. In Maryland, the entire backlog is an unsubmitted backlog. So it is all kits that law enforcement, for one reason or another, decided the kit did not need to be submitted for testing. Maryland SAKI project also covers the testing of these kits and the tracking of these kits. So this is a complete side note, but the state of Maryland launched a kit tracking system back in May. So it's a system that allows survivors, law enforcement, forensic nurse examiners to track a sexual assault evidence kit throughout the process. So from the moment it's collected at the hospital to its completion of testing and long-term storage. It also supports investigations and prosecutions and trainings like this one. And of course, victim notification services. So I want to ask the group, and go ahead and put it in the chat, that, as I said, we started off by conducting an inventory to see what our backlog looks like. And we evaluated or counted, I guess, every untested, unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kit in the state of Maryland that was older than May 1st, 2018, which was the cutoff date because this addresses historical cases. So, in your opinion, how many unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kits older than May 1st, 2018 do you feel or think the state of Maryland had in their possession when the inventory was conducted? And I'll go ahead and give it a second. All right, I see 1,400, so 1,400. Anyone, any other thoughts? I see your question in the chat, Catherine, about where they went, and I will address that in a moment. So we also see over 5,000 and 7,000. So 10,000. So the state of Maryland has, and it's taken a while to get there, but had about 7,587 unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kits that were older than May 1st, 2018 in their possession. If you included partially tested kits, so kits that were tested with outdated technology, and no DNA was found in them, then we were approaching closer to 8,000 of them. So a big chunk of unsubmitted kits within law enforcement's possession. So that's exactly what this grant aimed to do, was to get those tested. So Catherine, in the chat, I see your question. If the kits were not submitted to the crime lab, where did they go? Oh, this is like a really layered question, but the short answer is they just sat with law enforcement in storage. So the law enforcement agencies would hold on to them for evidence purposes, and they just stayed in their possession, unsubmitted and untested. To be clear, it was not until like I want to say 2016, maybe a little earlier, that law enforcement there was a statewide requirement that all law enforcement agencies store sexual assault evidence kits for a certain period of time. So prior to, like I said, 2016, law enforcement could destroy sexual assault evidence kits at their own discretion, at their own intervals. So we really had a problem in the state where, depending on where you were, Let's say you were in Montgomery County, they've never destroyed a kit that's in their possession, that was in their possession. Their backlog goes back to 1980s. But then you may go somewhere else in the state and they may have had a policy where they were destroying kits within a year, 2 years, a year and a half, whatever it may be. So that also affects our inventory numbers. Leah and I can put in the chat a link if you want to view a map that actually Leah developed so you can see each county and each law enforcement agency and their numbers. And so some of those numbers are going to be pretty large, some of them are going to be very small, and a lot of that has to do with how long they were storing sexual assault evidence kits. As of 2020 or earlier, all kits had to be maintained and stored for a minimum of 20 years. That has since been increased to a minimum of 75 years. So it's uniform throughout the state. So as we were looking at this, basically 7,500, 8,000 unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kits, we had to decide how we were going to engage the survivors. So this is a requirement under the SAKI grant. You have to engage survivors. How you engage them and what that looks like is up to your individual site. BJA does review and approve any protocols developed. So Maryland and MCASA sat down to develop a victim notification protocol. In looking at that protocol, we reviewed current best practices used by other SAKI sites that had existed for a year or longer before we had started our project to see what worked for them. We also looked at research conducted by other agencies like the Joyful Heart Foundation, who hosted focus groups to ask survivors how they felt about being notified about an old sexual assault evidence kit that may be 5 years old or 15 years old. So we really looked into that research to decide how we wanted to approach it. We incorporated the state committee, and specifically that includes the Office of the Attorney General, the governor's office, law enforcement personnel, other victim advocates, victims' rights attorneys, prosecutors. We really took a multidisciplinary team approach to try to develop this protocol. So before I dive into the actual protocol and what that looks like, I want to just be clear that when speaking today, you may hear me use the words victim and survivor interchangeably. In general, MCASA does tend to use the word survivor because victim is often used in just the criminal justice sense, and may have it's tied to specific crimes in the criminal justice system. So some survivors or victims do identify with one or the other. We do tend to use survivor just out of respect, but when working with someone, we recommend you use the language that they use, whether that's victim or survivor. You will hear me use them interchangeably today because largely the Bureau of Justice Assistance uses the term victim instead of survivor. Oh, sorry about that. So when developing the notification protocol, we looked at some guiding principles. But before we dive into those, I want to go over what we mean by victim notification. So victim notification is when we are reaching out to a survivor for whatever reason about their previously untested kit. Like I said, that is any kit older than May 1st, 2018. And so it could be, I think, I've been in communication with survivors that were assaulted in the 80s. So it could be decades old or it could be, 5 years old. But whatever it is not a one-time event. We recognize that we are contacting a survivor and we are kind of reminding them of a very traumatic time in their life that could be incredibly upsetting. We don't know the current state of their life or how they've processed it. We processed the trauma. We don't know who in their life is aware of the assault. So really, it is ongoing communication that we engage with the survivor. There's a lot of referrals to support agencies like the rape crisis centers in their community. and other services as well. We also recognize that it's both a legal and psychological issue. I think when we talk about victim notification, so many times we just think, oh my gosh, we're going to re-traumatize these individuals, we're going to upset them. But there's more to it than just that. There is a legal component and questions about the criminal justice process that they initially engaged in years ago. So they often have a lot of questions about what happened to their case, why was their kit never tested, and what's going to happen now. And that has a lot of legal components to it as well. So keeping that in mind, we aim to be victim-centered in all of our notification attempts and all of our contact with survivors. So this means we're putting the survivor at the center of all the decisions that are being made, and their involvement with the criminal justice system. So this is something that should be critical to not only just MCASA and the victim advocate, but everyone that is involved in this process. And this goes for all engagement, not just notifications and historically unsubmitted SAKEs. So we're really looking at honoring the victim's choice, prioritizing their safety and well-being over everything else. So again, this could be a re-traumatizing moment for them. And if they do not want to engage, that is something we look at and we definitely honor that request. We also recognize that there could be safety issues, whether it's they're still with a partner who assaulted them years ago, or simply they're with a new partner who doesn't know about the assault that happened to them years ago. There are safety and privacy issues. So we really want to honor and put the victim at the center of things and recognize all their concerns. The other guiding principle is being trauma informed. As you know, advocates, I'm sure we're all aware of what trauma informed means. We're looking at just attending to the victim's needs, whether that's legal, emotional, physical, safety. We're putting those needs first and foremost. I really want to highlight here that a lot of times when we're looking at these, we're asking ourselves, are we doing harm, or is the notification going to re-traumatize? And being trauma informed doesn't necessarily mean not notifying a survivor about their kit. It's how you do that notification. Being trauma informed means you're approaching it with empathy and concern for the survivor, and keeping that trauma informed mentality and victim mentality at the center of all engagement with the survivor. So when we had these guiding principles and then broke down how we actually wanted to conduct notifications, we looked at other SAKI sites, successes and challenges. And really what we wanted to highlight was in being trauma-informed and being victim-centered and putting the survivor at the center of all things. We really wanted to empower survivors to come forward and tell us what information they did or didn't want. So that's where on the right side of the screen, you have an opt-in notification process. So there's two processes for our notification in Maryland. The opt-in is a hotline or email address run by the MCASA SAKI team, so like Leah and I, who are available to talk to survivors looking to learn about their untested or unsubmitted SAKE. So they contact us. They can call us and say, hey, I heard about this project. I was assaulted in 2015 and I don't want to hear from you all. I don't want to know. I've moved on from my life. Please don't contact me. So during that, technically, I guess that would be an opt-out, but we write that information down. We let them know that if their kit is identified, they will not be contacted, and to let us know if they change their mind. So they can contact us again and say, hey, I talked to my therapist, I talked to an advocate, and I worked through this, and I really, I think I'm in a place where I do want to know about my kit now. Then we can engage with them. Survivors can also opt in and say, hey, I want to know what happened to my kit. My husband isn't aware that I was assaulted or raped, and So I really don't know if I'm ready to speak to him about it. So please contact me at this phone number between these hours of the day when he's at work, and don't leave a message just because I don't want him to know I've reached out to you. So they really get to outline how, when, and when they are contacted. So that's really important in empowering them and protecting their privacy and ultimately their safety in many cases. Um, in contrast, we have active notification. This type of notification is when we have a kit that was unsubmitted, untested, and has now been tested, and we need to contact that survivor for notification. They have not contacted the opt-in line. We are not aware how they want to be contacted, and we don't even know if we have their correct contact information. But our advocates begin reaching out to survivors to let them know that there is information about their previously unsubmitted kit and to see if they would like to receive that information. This is a bit more difficult. There's a lot of challenges because we do have to navigate, is this number still belong to the survivor? Is it a number that was like a home line back in 2002 and it's a family line still? We have to navigate that. We have a lot of procedures in place to protect survivors, and so we don't disclose inadvertently to anyone else. But the challenge on that end is that oftentimes when someone gets a cold call, they think that we are a telemarketer and it's difficult, or they're reluctant to engage with us. So it's a bit difficult to navigate, but we have made successful contact with, I want to say 400 or approaching 400 survivors at this point. So we do make progress and we do make successful contact. So thinking about when notifications will be conducted. You have an untested or unsubmitted, I'm sorry, I use those phrases interchangeably, but you have an unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kit. When do you think would be the best time to reach out to a survivor in that case to talk to them about that untested kit? Can't remember if this is a poll question, but basically, in your opinion, if you want to put your answer in the chat, oh, this is a question. So if you can go ahead and take a moment to select when you think survivors should be notified. All right, looks like some responses have slowed down. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So, the majority of you, well, most people said before any historical kit is tested. And we also have some that indicated once testing is complete, and then a few that said, well, only when an offender is be identified or only when prosecution is being considered. So let me break down how Maryland approaches this very difficult question. In most cases, we will not contact the survivor until after testing is completed. So this is, the kit has been identified through the inventory as never being submitted or tested. So it is now goes on to testing. And once the results are sent to law enforcement, they reach out and initiate the victim notification protocol with us. So they let us know that the kit has now been tested, and they would like us to contact the survivor so we can discuss those results with them if they want. This includes kits where no DNA was found or the DNA was not eligible to go into CODIS, which is the national database of DNA profiles of violent offenders. So this was a difficult decision for us because of the question, are we re-traumatizing survivors? Should we only be contacting them if an offender is identified? Because otherwise we're opening a door to a wound for no reason, so to speak. Well, this decision, which we refer to as a notify all approach, was based on our research and has been supported by our engagement with these over I think approaching 400 survivors at this point. But the research by End the Block Backlog with focus groups of survivors who had an untested or unsubmitted SAKE said that the majority of them felt that they deserved to know when something happened to their kit. They felt like their kit belonged to them. It was part of them, and they deserved to know when it was tested or when something happened, regardless of what that result is. So we really took that to heart. And again, we implemented this notify all approach because we don't want to make an assumption of what a survivor wants to know. If we contact a survivor and they say, "Hey, I've moved on. No, I don't want to hear anything," then we honor that request and we don't bother them again. But for the most part, we are seeing that survivors want the information regardless of what the result is. It is validating to them because all these years ago, they reported an assault. They went forward, had a long invasive exam, and they expected that kit to be tested. Just because years have passed doesn't change that expectation for them. So we do a notify all approach. The other thing that I really like to say, because this was mentioned in the backlog study, was we like to, when talking about victim notification like this, we again always refer to re-traumatizing. We don't get to decide what is re-traumatizing to a survivor. That is really patronizing, and it assumes what is best for the survivor and what the survivor wants, instead of asking them and empowering them to make the choice that is best for them. It also assumes that they are fragile over compared to being strong or resilient, when in fact, most survivors are both. And just because something is quote unquote bad news doesn't mean it's news they don't want. So again, we really empower the survivor to make the choice. And also, I don't make assumptions about whether it's good news or bad news. When I first started doing this work, there were some times where I would get a case and it would be, "Oh, there is no male DNA found in this kit. This is going to be really upsetting to the survivor." And it was good news for the survivor. So we don't know what's good news or bad news. We don't know how they're going to handle it. We don't know any of that. And we shouldn't get to make those assumptions. There are some cases where we do notifications before testing takes place. And this is when a survivor previously signed a waiver of investigation or otherwise said that they didn't want their kit tested. Unfortunately, it wasn't until recently that waivers of investigation were banned in the state of Maryland. So these are forms where a survivor is asked to sign them, and it says something along the lines of they're waiving the investigation. They will not come forward to ask for an investigation to be reopened. They won't hold a law enforcement agency liable for not investigating the crime that they reported, et cetera, et cetera. So in those cases, we really wondered, do we reach out to them at all? Or do we just assume that they sign the waiver, they stand by that waiver, and we don't contact them or communicate with them unless they reach out to us through the opt-in line. We ultimately decided that if they signed a waiver, we will reach out to them and ask them if they understood what they signed and if they still stand by that decision. We mostly decided this because of the fact that they are banned in Maryland now, they're prohibited, and also they're just a really, really bad practice. For example, we've seen cases where a survivor went to the hospital, intoxicated, asked for an exam. The nurses said that she was too intoxicated to consent to the procedure, which is completely understandable. So they needed her to sit and sober up, and then they could conduct the exam when she was deemed able to consent. In the meantime, she had said she wanted to report to the police, so the police reported to the hospital, and while she was too intoxicated to consent to the exam in the rape kit, law enforcement had her or presented her with a waiver, which she signed. Not understanding what it meant, obviously still intoxicated. So the practice is really considered poor, and we're revisiting all of those cases. Interestingly, in my experience, and Leah, if you want to chime in about it, the majority of the survivors I've contacted in those cases are aware of what they signed, but are not aware it meant their kit was not going to be tested or was not tested. A lot of them were under the impression that they were only presented with the form because their kit was tested. All investigative leads were extinguished, like everything possible was done, and there was nothing else that could be done. So it's incredibly interesting to me that most of them are unaware of what it meant and unaware that it meant their kit wasn't tested, and actually do choose to re-engage with the system and have their kit tested. Yes, so there's a question in the chat from Naomi. After they are asked if they understand the waiver, are they given the option of whether or not they want their kit to be tested? Yes, so we go over that we understand, based on the review of their case, that they signed a waiver of investigation to stop all investigative proceedings and, not move forward with prosecution if that was an option. We let them know that as part of that, their kit was never tested or submitted to the lab for testing, and would they like to do that now? So essentially, they are revoking the waiver and re-engaging with the process. We go over with a lot of them if they want to reopen their case and restart an investigation off the bat. That is a law enforcement decision, but we try and understand what their wishes are. And some just kind of want the kit tested, want those results, and then want to decide and talk to law enforcement about what that means. There are some that say that they stand by that waiver and they don't want their kit tested. We simply say, let them know that if they ever change their mind, they are welcome to come forward and reach out to us and have their kit tested now. So I have another poll question for you, and thinking about these, oh, I did forget on the last slide. Give me 1 second. At the beginning of this project, the last bullet point, we were reaching out to survivors to ask them if they had any consensual partners around the time of the exam. Unfortunately, this is a question that should be asked at the time of the exam, so that the lab can make sure that any DNA found through testing doesn't belong to a consensual partner, and they are reasonably certain DNA belongs to a perpetrator or an offender. This was a really difficult thing for us to do. We did it at first because it seemed like it was required. But we found it was incredibly upsetting for a lot of survivors, because not only were they hearing that their kit was never submitted, but they were also like, hey, do you remember if you had any consensual sex with someone about 15 days before the assault? And can you tell me who that person is? And we may need to reach out to them for an exclusionary sample. It seemed like a lot of survivors found this extra re-traumatizing because they didn't remember. They felt they were being quote unquote slut shamed, depending on, their lifestyle at that point in time. And we actually now do not ask about consensual partners until testing is completed on the back end. So that is because not every kit that's tested is going to yield a DNA profile. So we don't want to ask survivors unnecessarily about consensual partners. We wait to see what results are available, and then we go from there, which has been a much smoother process on our end. So now, in thinking about these kinds of conversations, I have another poll question of who do you feel should be responsible for conducting these notifications, for reaching out and talking to the survivors? Give it a minute. Right. Seems like we have a good amount answered, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. The majority of you said a victim advocate, with some saying law enforcement, attorney, nurse, or other. So if you said other, I would really love to hear your thoughts on who else could be conducting that notification. So if you want to put that in the chat, I'd appreciate it. Really, if anyone wants to share their thought process on this, feel free to put it in the chat. But in looking at our decision for this, we really wanted to try and incorporate a team approach. So the notification process is broken down into kind of phases. And the initial contact is conducted by an advocate. So it does say MCASA SAKI advocate. So that's Leah, myself, or another member of our team. Rape Crisis Center advocates can also do these notifications, should it be something the Rape Crisis Center wants to take on. We have not had any Rape Crisis Centers do that at this point in time, but it is possible. Okay, so I'm going to get back to that question in a second, but so usually that first phase of the notification process is with an MCASA SAKI advocate. And then once the survivor decides if they want to receive information about their kit, they are offered the opportunity to meet with law enforcement. So the victim advocate is not taking on the role of law enforcement by saying, hey, we tested your kit, here's the results, here's what that means for your case, we have all these questions for you, and we're not going to prosecute. Or we don't know if we're going to prosecute. That is not our role. Our role is simply to inform the survivor that their kit was identified as an unsubmitted kit through this project, and we have decided it was tested or it is being considered for testing, and to determine what they want to do next. Then they get to decide who to engage in that conversation. So they're asked if they would like to meet with law enforcement, and they can meet with law enforcement independently, or they can meet with law enforcement with an advocate present as support. We've had survivors choose both. So survivors that say, thank you for calling me, I don't need an advocate. Can you provide me with the detective's name and I'll reach out to them? Or you can provide the detective my information and he'll reach out and have them reach out to me. We really try and honor that. And then we incorporate other parties as necessary. So if there are health related questions, we may incorporate a forensic nurse examiner. You've also seen law enforcement bring a state's attorney to a meeting with a survivor because they want to incorporate that perspective off the bat. And so, sorry, before I hand it over to you, Leah, I want to address the question from Naomi in the chat. If a survivor did the SAFE exam anonymously, but lost the case number they were given to get the kit investigated, is it still possible for them to find the case, get it tested, and get the results? If so, how? So, Naomi, I see your emails in the chat. I'll reach out to you for a more in-depth answer. But it is a bit difficult process to try and identify that, but it is possible to do so. We would recommend it would be a lot of coordinating between the hospital and the law enforcement agency and the survivor. What would have to be done was try and narrow down the survivor what kit it belongs to, and because there's no identifying information, it would have to be like, okay, what day was the exam conducted, what hospital, do we have a time frame, etc., and then trying to narrow that down to say, okay, we have an anonymous kit that was collected on that day at this hospital, and so we are under the belief that it belongs to this survivor. It's a really difficult process and it's not 100% guaranteed. With the kit tracking system that's now in place, each survivor gets a kit case number or kit number or identifier, and the hospital keeps track of those. So in each medical file, it is recommended that the forensic nurse also indicate this is the kit tracking number. So should that happen, the survivor can directly contact the hospital that provided the exam. They can look at the case file and see what the case number is for tracking, and then it can be identified that way. So a smoother process now that we have the tracking system, not impossible for historical cases. And we have had survivors opt in and say, I was anonymous when this happened to me. I want to report now and have my kid tested. And we've helped them navigate that. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Leah. I'll go ahead. I'll keep an eye on the chat too.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. So we're going to get to talking about how do notifications take place. So Laura, if you can, there we go. So the first step is planning, right? So as Laura mentioned, we are a multidisciplinary team. We take a team approach when doing notification of any kind with survivors. And so the first thing we do is we plan, right? So law enforcement typically contacts us here at MCASA to request a notification. During the request, they will include why this notification is being conducted, right? So are they asking us to reach out because it's some pre-testing? This person may have signed a waiver, or are they asking us to reach out because they've already tested this kit and now we need to contact them and let them know that there's test results, right? So that is one of the first things we do. Once we get the notification request from law enforcement, myself or another member of the SAKI team will then search our opt-in database to determine whether or not the survivor has opted in, right? And as you remember previously, we tend to adhere to the preferences of our survivors who do opt in. So once we determine whether or not they're in the database for opt-in, then we proceed with creating an individualized notification plan based on those opt-in preferences if available, right? If it's not available, then we will continue to create the notification plan with the information that we are provided by law enforcement. So usually when law enforcement sends over the notification plan, it will include some pertinent information. So we'll have the survivor's name, we'll have their most recent address or the last known address. We'll have some of their contact information. We might even have additional information like a family member, right? This is usually, we usually see that information when the person was a minor at the time of the incident. And so we will then, again, use all that information. Plus, we will conduct additional searches to make sure we're finding the best way to reach out to this person. So that's the first thing we do. We plan. The second step is the contact step. So when we're getting ready to make these calls, right, again, we are adhering to either the opt-in preferences or the active notification, right? And so again, if this victim or survivor has opted in, we will make sure that we're making contact according to those preferences. So as Laura had mentioned, sometimes we will have a survivor say, hey, I'm married now. They're not aware of what happened to me. Can you call me on this day at this time? We would make sure we would do that. Sometimes I've had survivors that say, just text me, right? Because they may be at work and they're not ready to have that conversation over the phone. We would adhere to that. I've had survivors that ask me, can you just leave me a voice message and I will get back to you, right? On our opt-in form, those are some of the things that we ask, right? How do you want to be contacted? Is it okay to leave a voice message, right? Is it okay to send a text message? So we want to make sure that as we're getting ready to contact survivors to notify them of this request that we got from law enforcement, that we're doing so according to their preferences. The other way when it comes to contacting is if the survivor has not opted in, right? So we're doing that active notification or cold calling, as we like to call it, right? So this is where here at MCASA and law enforcement, we will do our best to use whatever available contact information that law enforcement provides us to connect with the survivor, right? And so once law enforcement sends over that notification request, with whatever information they have in their system, we will also do additional searches, additional background checks, and see if we can get the most recent information for the survivor. MCASA's SAKI staff will make the first contact, right? And so again, based on the type of notification, we may be contacting them to say, hey, We have some test results for you, or we may be contacting them to let them know that, hey, we saw that you signed a waiver and we want to make sure that this is exactly what you want and whether or not you actually want your kid tested. Depending on the outcome, will determine the next step, which is oftentimes either scheduling a meeting with law enforcement or assisting with law enforcement connecting with the survivor.
And Leah, before I go to the next slide, I just want to note, because I forgot to mention it before and you just made me think of it. We have unfortunately also had to contact survivors to let them know that their kit was either lost or destroyed against statutory requirements for retention. So we've also had those difficult conversations, which kind of change our approach to the conversation completely. But again, we stand by that stance of informing survivors of information about their kit and letting them decide what they want to do with it. So I apologize for interrupting you. I just wanted to chime in on that, and then I'll move to the next question, next slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. So the third step in our notification process is the follow-up meeting, right? So the follow-up meeting will be held again based on the preferences outlined during that initial contact. So when we are contacting a survivor, say to let them know that we have test results from their kit, we usually ask them, one, would they like to meet with law enforcement, right? And two, would they like to meet with law enforcement with an advocate present? I can tell you, as someone who does these calls, oftentimes they do want to meet with law enforcement as long as there's an advocate present. And that is for a variety of reasons, right? So during that follow-up meeting, what we push oftentimes is for an apology. So myself as an advocate will offer an apology to this survivor. And really the apology is just making sure that we're acknowledging that the system failed them, right? We're acknowledging that unfortunately they have had to go all these years without closure, with uncertainty, right? And so we make sure that both an apology comes from the advocate as well as law enforcement. Now, during the follow-up meeting, law enforcement will begin to discuss what those test results mean, any next steps, and then we make sure that we empower the survivor to determine how they want to proceed, right? So during that follow-up meeting, law enforcement might let them know, like, hey, there's a possibility that an investigation can occur, right? Or they might let them know that, there was no DNA found, but we have some referrals for you if you need them, right? Either way, we want to empower the survivors so that they have all the information that they need to make the informed decision about what's next for them, right? And so as an advocate, we will also make sure that we're making those referrals, right? So we're making sure that we're connecting them to mental health services if they need it. If they want to know their civil options legally, right, we might make a referral to our SALI Institute. But here at MCASA, we do our best to collaborate with not only each rape crisis center, but the SAFE programs and make those referrals when needed. So now I want to talk a little bit about the apology. The apology is absolutely critical, right? When this project was coming together, Maryland and as well as other SAKI sites really was able to witness the power of offering an apology, right? Research has shown that many survivors feel better about the circumstances of their case when someone acknowledges the error that was made, right? And how they were treated. The truth of the matter is the ball was dropped, right? Let's be honest about it. The ball was dropped, and many survivors have been left with unanswered questions, which oftentimes delays their healing process, right? And so we want to make sure that not only as advocates, but also as law enforcement, attorney generals, FNEs, that we're acknowledging that. We're acknowledging the error that was made. We're acknowledging how they were treated, and we're issuing that apology, right? And so we know that survivors who receive the apology were more likely to re-engage. And that is just from experiences that we've had here at MCASA on the SAKI team, that the ones that did get an apology, they were more likely to continue. So now I want to share some tips for offering an apology. And I will give you some tips from both an advocate and law enforcement perspective. Sorry if the image seems blurry, right? But as advocates, right, an apology from an advocate is just as powerful and is just as necessary, right, than the ones from law enforcement. Really, the purpose of the apology is validating the survivor's experience, right? Recognizing that there was an error made, right? Recognizing that the system did fail them and that they have had to go really long time without answers, right? And so when we're apologizing on behalf of the system, we want to say something like, I'm sorry for the pain and the uncertainty you've experienced after reporting the sexual assault, and that you're available to support them and provide information that to local resources that are available, right? So we want to make sure that each and every survivor that we're encountering understands that we recognize what happened, right? And the one thing that I want to say is that this is not a personal ownership, right? Because oftentimes we ran into, especially with law enforcement, that they feel like they have to, they're taking personal responsibility. No, this is recognizing that the system failed each and every one of these survivors. And so when we apologize, we're apologizing on behalf of the system that failed them, right? For those that work in law enforcement, again, we've learned that offering an apology to each survivor for that pain and uncertainty that they experience is, again, powerful, right? But not only is it powerful, it's very important that the apology is sincere, right? I always say, put yourself in the shoes of the survivor, right? This could be your mother, this could be your friend, this could be your daughter, this could be your niece, your nephew, right? So put yourself in their shoes and acknowledge that the system failed them, right? So if you work in law enforcement, you can say something like, I'm sorry for the original handling of your case, and I apologize on behalf of the police department. We are changing our policies to ensure that all investigations are thorough, and this is why we've tested your kit. I'm here to support you and answer any questions you may have, right? This type of apology, again, acknowledges the error, acknowledges what happened, but also lets a survivor know, hey, we recognize we made this error and we're doing something about it. So we're changing our policies. We're looking at our investigations and making sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to do so this doesn't happen again. So those are some tips on how you can begin to offer an apology. So how do notifications take place, right? Step 4, ultimately, when we are working with survivors, we want to empower them, right? So after they've had the follow-up meeting, we want to make sure that the survivor walks away with a complete outline of next steps, right? So they know what is happening next, right? Who do they need to contact moving forward, right? We want to make sure that if they decide, say there's an opportunity for investigation, right, that they have all the details regarding that, right? So who's going to be at the interview? When is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? Is this going to be virtually? Is it going to be in person, right? How involved do they need to be during this investigation process, right? If they need access to mental health services, who should they be contacting or how will they get the therapy they need, right? We want to, again, put all the information in front of every survivor so that they walk away feeling empowered. But most importantly, during that follow-up meeting and after, it's an opportunity for them to continue to speak privately, not only with advocates, but also law enforcement, right? So this is why we say notification is not a one-time event. It's ongoing because we don't just leave them once we've had the follow-up meeting. We continue to reach out, we continue to support, we continue to ask what is it that they need and make those referrals as necessary. And then step 5. So we often here at MCASA, we do a survivor survey. And the survivor survey comes at the time of the follow-up meeting. We do ask all survivors who have had follow-up meetings if they would be willing to take a survey about their experience at a later time. And if they say yes, a member of the MCASA SAKI team will definitely contact them to conduct the survey. The information that we get in the survey is what helps continue to guide us to making any future changes to any protocols we have, highlight the areas that maybe we've overlooked. The SAKI survey is something new. We are getting, survivors that are completing the survey, and we appreciate their feedback because, again, we want to make sure that everything we're doing is to make sure that we're not re-traumatizing survivors, but we're empowering them with the next steps. So now let's talk a little bit about the local SART involvement, right? So the sexual assault response team, which is also known as SART, this is an opportunity for, again, because we are multidisciplinary team to come together and collaborate and communicate, right? So at the local SARTs, there's an opportunity to discuss what survivors are impacted by SAKI may need, right? So this is a conversation amongst victim advocates, F&Es, law enforcement, right? We're coming together to figure out what are the current needs of survivors, those especially that have been impacted by SAKI. Um, but also we're determining how can we meet those needs, right? Because we know that it looks different for every survivor, right? And so we want to make sure that not only are we discussing what's coming up, but what can we do as a multidisciplinary team to make sure that we're meeting those needs. The other thing that we'd like to talk about during the SART meetings are getting that understanding of the protocol, right? So making sure that everyone that's a part of this team understands the victim notification program protocol, make sure that they understand that they should be working with MCASA as well as law enforcement to make sure any proper referrals are made. And also, we want to encourage team members to look at your numbers and the cases with open eyes, right? So this is an opportunity during our SART team to really just go through some of the cases that we have, right? Some of the cases that may be questioned whether or not it needs to be submitted for testing or not. This is that opportunity. And so during our local SART team as well, we tend to conduct outreach for agency participation, right? And so it is one of the things that Laura and a few other members of our SAKI team go to on a weekly basis just to make sure that we are doing our best to address all the needs of survivors, particularly those impacted by SAKI. And so know that if you sit on a SART team or you're a part of a SART team, that MCASA is here to help you in any way that we can. So, what can you do to help, right? I believe that everyone has an individual role. And so that role looks like one, share the protocol with your member agencies, right? So make sure that you are giving out that information, passing along the protocol. Also, post our opt-in lines, right? So again, one of the ways that we can reach out to survivors or survivors can begin to reach out to us. And so make sure you're posting that opt-in line information to your agency's website or your social media accounts. You can also work towards ensuring that SART meets that COMAR regulations. So definitely check with your local SART to make sure that they're doing everything that they're supposed to be doing and meeting COMAR's requirements. You can conduct outreach to agencies that are not actively involved. If you know of an agency that's just not involved, definitely make sure that you reach out to them or reach out to us and ask us to help you with outreaching to those non-participating agencies.
And Leah, before I go to the next slide, I do want to note that I put again the link to the map, the impact map. So looking at that map, you'll be able to see every agency's unsubmitted kit inventory, and then you'll also be able to see if they've submitted any for testing to date. So there are like 50 some agencies in the state that handle sexual assaults and sexual assault evidence kits. So again, take a look at it. And if you see that your local agency isn't submitting kits for testing, reach out to us, reach out to the agency, definitely advocate for that, like Leah said. Oh, and I guess it's my turn next. So I do, as we wrap this up, I we want to give a moment to share a survivor's story. And Leah is a survivor, thriver of sexual assault with her own story that just demonstrates exactly, the impact of an untested, unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kit on a survivor of sexual assault, and how important it is to handle notifications with sensitivity and putting the survivor's needs first and foremost. So I'm gonna stop sharing so that I can share the video. I'm going to put on closed captions, and I'm also going to make sure the volume is all the way up, but sometimes it is a relatively, like, it sounds low for some individuals. So hopefully the closed captions will help. I'll also put a link into the chat just in case it's low or you cannot get that sound. Obviously Leah is here. Leah is here to answer any questions about her experience. We do just ask that you're sensitive. Leah is incredibly strong and brave to speak out about this. I know she's open to those questions. Just please be sensitive about that. And while I pull this up, is this showing? I'm having some difficulties.
No.
Okay, let me try again. Is that up now?
Yep.
Okay.
I don't hear the sound though.
You may need to reshare with audio if you haven't already. I'm not hearing sound either.
Um, I swear I checked this before we started, but of course it's not working. Let's try this again. Of untested rape kits. And she's here to
Perfect.
Can you guys hear that?
Yep.
Okay. Share her story and provide some insight um, on her experience and what you as law enforcement can do to help in these circumstances. And I do want to note that not only is she brave, and we truly appreciate her for reaching out to us and taking this on and being a true voice for people, but I just found it so powerful that, Leah identifies not as a victim anymore, not as a survivor anymore. And she did move through those, but she is a survivor or thriver. And she's doing that, and she's thriving because she's had support, and she's here to tell you about that experience that she's had. So I'm going to hand it over to Leah. We will be monitoring the chat, so any questions you have for Leah, for her experience, or for us about the protocol, we will loop back to, being mindful of time and being mindful of what types of questions are given to Leah.
Good morning. So first, let me just say thank you to MCASA and Sally for this opportunity to share with you guys. As Laura mentioned, I am a thriver of sexual assault. I do not see myself as a victim or a survivor of sexual assault, but it was not always like that for me, right? And so for me, the day that my life changed drastically, or what I like to call a defining moment in my life, was January 27, 2013, in the state of North Carolina. I was raped in my apartment by somebody I knew. And so before I go into the details about that or give a brief synopsis about that, one of the things that I want to do is kind of dismantle some myths. And that is because when I have worked with law enforcement, a lot of the conversation was that I wasn't believed because I knew the person. And so, just statistically wise, I want somebody to hear this, that 9 out of 10 victims of rape are female. 55% of sexual assault occur at or near the victim's home. 8 out of 10 rapes occur by someone the victim knew. 39% of those rapes are committed by an acquaintance, and 33% of those rapes are committed by either a current or former spouse, boyfriend, and or girlfriend. Now, you're probably saying, why does that even matter, right? And that is because as a thriver of sexual assault, I fell into those statistics. And because I fell into those statistics, I felt that my case was mishandled because law enforcement did not believe that because I knew the person, had a casual dating life with that person, that they could not have raped me, right? And so, just a brief synopsis of my story. I met my perpetrator after living in the state of North Carolina for 2 years. We met at a car rental place. He was working at the car rental place at the time. I happened to be there because I was looking to rent a car due to my car breaking down, right? He was very charming. He was very sweet. We engaged in conversation. When I decided not to get the car rental, he offered to drive me home. Hence, he knew where I lived. He even offered to take me to dinner. Hence, he was charming, right? So after about 1 or 2 dates with this individual, I decided not to see him anymore. But he was always around. He was always around, and he would always randomly pop up in places where I was. It was almost as if he had a GPS on me, right? So January 27, 2013, he randomly calls me, right? When he randomly calls me on that specific day, I happen to be in a very emotional state because I just got off the phone after receiving a phone call of a loved one passing. So when he calls me that day, I'm already an emotional wreck. He offers to come over and console me. And against my better judgment, I allow him to. Little did I know he was already sitting outside my apartment. So he comes to my house again under the guidance of I'm here to support, here to comfort you. But the minute he walked in my unit, something just did not feel right. There was this gut-wrenching feeling on the inside of me that says something is not right. He sat on my couch, and instead of consoling me, he proceeds to want to argue about why I no longer wanted to deal with him. I asked him to leave, and as he pretended to leave, he immediately grabs me and proceeds to rape me right there in my apartment. Now you can imagine, and that's just a brief synopsis of what happened on that day. You can only imagine the emotional turmoil, the physical turmoil, the upset, the fear that I was in that moment in time in my life. And because of that, I really wanted to share just that synopsis so you can understand how difficult this is when you're encountering a victim or a survivor or a thriver of sexual assault. Not many of them have what I like to call the resiliency factor. For me, I was able to bounce back. I was able to get the support, go to therapy, rely on my family, rely on my friends, rely on my spirituality and God to get me through. So many of them don't have that opportunity. And so I wanted to leave you guys with an understanding of how to look at victim. I think many times when we encounter a victim, whether it's of sexual assault, of any crime, we immediately think that this individual is weak. And we're not weak. We may be in a weakened state because emotionally we are trying to process all that we feel and all that is coming to us, but we really want to be empowered. We really want to make the right decision for us in order to get through what it is that we're facing. And so, every victim, survivor, or thriver of sexual assault needs the following from law enforcement or anyone that they come in contact with, right? And so the V in victim stands for validation. Put yourself in their shoes. What if that was your daughter? What if that was your mom? What if that was your aunt? What if that was your uncle? Put yourself in their shoes. Empathize with them. Listen to them. Offer an apology. And let me say, the apology is not coming from a personal place. We're not saying you have to personally take responsibility for what happened. But what we are saying is, hey, it would be nice to say, you know what? We dropped the ball. I am sorry. So offer an apology. Validate what it is that we're feeling. Validate what it is that we're experiencing. The I in victim stands for insight. Don't be afraid to provide them with resources and information about the process from beginning to end. One of the things I wish the state of North Carolina did was give me insight. It's a lot of information that I found out 8 years later after my rape kit was tested that I wish I knew 8 years ago when I was going through this process. And so because I didn't have the insight, I didn't know what the process was going to look like. I didn't know that after the rape kit comes, then I have to go through the notification process and have to meet with the DA. And I didn't know these things. So provide the insight, give them the resources. And if you don't know, connect them to somebody that does know so that they feel like they can make a very informed decision about what it is that they want, because this is their choice. The C in victim stands for compassion. Again, be a listening ear. They're not trying to beat you up. They're not trying to blame you for what has happened. They just want to be heard. We just want to be heard. And again, I can only share from my experience. I wish that I was heard. I wish that I didn't have to stand in front of, and I'll share, when I encountered law enforcement, the officer literally asked me 7 times, was I sure that he raped me because I knew him? 7 times, I counted. That's not being compassionate. If I tell you that that's what it was, then compassion is believing me enough to say, okay, we'll take the report. We'll do what we have to do to support you. So be compassionate. The T in victim stands for timely. Provide them with timely and up-to-date information regarding their case. I shouldn't have to wait 8 years to find out that the DNA test came, like it was a DNA match on my rape kit. That to me, that's an injustice. So provide them with timely information. Let them know, hey, this is where we are in the process. This is what needs to happen next. This is the part we need you to play. Again, taking them on that journey with you, step by step, together. It's a partnership. And I know law enforcement a lot of times get a bad rap, but you want to know how we can build that bridge? It's to partner together with the victim, the survivor, or the thriver. Because we don't know what's best for us, but the more insight we get, the more we can make an informed decision. The I in victim stands for instruction. Again, be willing to guide them through this process. Be willing to hold their hand as they make a decision. And let me tell you, the decision is very hard to make. And it's not you wake up the next day and boom, I want to go ahead and prosecute. No, it's very hard to make. And so give that space. Be willing to be as patient as they need you to be during this process. Ask them, how can I support you in making this decision? Because again, it is not that easy to make. As someone who just had to make that decision again 8 years later for my rape kit, it wasn't easy. I went back and forth with my support system. I went back and forth in my mind. I prayed about it. I talked to my therapist about it. I did all these things to process just to make the decision. So again, be willing to guide them, be willing to hold their hand, be willing to support them in making that decision. And then the M in victim stands for mindfulness. Always keep in mind that you are encountering somebody's child, somebody's friend, somebody's colleague, somebody's sibling, somebody's parent. So practice mindfulness. Again, we want to work with law enforcement because we don't understand this process. But it's very hard to do when we encounter law enforcement to be cold or don't believe us. I'll tell you, I got raped on a Sunday. I didn't report it till Tuesday. And it's because of my fear that nobody was going to believe me. It was because of my shame of this. I allowed this to happen because I let him in my house. So unless you have experienced it for yourself, you're not going to understand how difficult this really is. And so in closing, I just really want you guys to begin to think of the word victim in a different way. It's no longer the definition that we're used to. It really is providing practical steps that you can take when you're encountering any victim of a crime. Okay. And again, that is to validate, that is to give insight, that is to be compassionate, that is to provide timely information, give instruction, and of course, be mindful. And so again, I thank you guys for allowing me to really be a part of this training. And I hope that you guys take this information with you, hearing it directly from a thriver of sexual assault, that this is what we need in order to work successfully together when dealing with sexual assault cases.
So we are so glad that Leah was able to join our team after she initially just spoke at some trainings. So if there's any questions for Leah in the chat, please feel free to chime in. I do also want to note a couple things that were missed by me earlier in the presentation. So Maryland is doing work to make sure a future backlog of unsubmitted or untested kits does not occur. And so in doing that, they created a statutory requirement that all kits be submitted to a crime lab for testing unless one of 4 narrow exemptions is met. So essentially, there is no longer law enforcement discretion like there used to be on when a kit is or isn't tested. It is outlined in Maryland statute. Just like the information on this retaining kits for 75 years. And also the point Leah made about having to wait 8 years to hear something, I want to note that Maryland previously did not have anything that said a survivor had the right to information about their kit. So only recently survivors were explicitly given this right. In the state of Maryland. So now survivors who had a sexual assault evidence kit have the right to information about the testing, decision to test, the status of the testing, being notified before a kit is destroyed, etc. So when a survivor may come forward and say they want that information, they want to know if their kit was tested, law enforcement has 30 days to respond to that. So we use that guideline in our notification process as well. So we expect some timely communication, just like Leah said, for the T in victim from law enforcement. So the other thing that I saw was a question in the chat. What does it mean if the maps, so the SAKI impact map on our website says a county has 0 unsubmitted kits? Does that mean there is no backlog in that county? The short answer is yes. That means there is no backlog in the county. I may have just lost internet, so if that's the case, I apologize. But that means there's no backlog in that county. I want to be clear that that doesn't mean that county or that agency tested all of their kits. that could be the case, or it could be that they destroyed their kits in a very, very short period of time so that they didn't have any unsubmitted or untested once we conducted that inventory. Like I said, until recently, agencies could just destroy kits at their own discretion for whatever reason. So I've seen agencies destroy kits in a year and a half, regardless of if it was tested or not. So it's possible they always tested their kits and that's why they don't have any. It's also possible they destroyed them. And I think that wraps things up for us, unless I'm missing anything, Leah. We'll stick around, see if anything else comes up in the chat. Leah put our emails in the chat as well, so feel free to reach out to us directly if you have any questions.
Thank you both for that wonderful presentation. I would also like to direct everyone's attention to the chat. I posted today's anonymous evaluation form. Again, if you are seeking a certificate of attendance or a certificate for CEU credits, you must complete the evaluation form. And upon submitting the evaluation form, you'll see a box at the top of your webpage containing a link. If you click on that link, you'll be able to access the certificate request form. I'll be sending out a follow-up email later today with today's video recording, the links that were from the chat, as well as the PowerPoint slides that were used in the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to respond to that email. And as Leah and Flora said, we will stick around for additional questions. Thank you.